Hello and welcome to the latest video in this series, which asks the question, which money is best? Today's answer is the one that you're all expecting, cryptocurrencies. But do cryptocurrencies really live up to all of the hype? I've asked my old friend and co-conspirator Sam Volkering this time to answer that question, and he's been telling me about Bitcoin since 2012. And Sam, I know Bitcoin was the investment opportunity of a lifetime, as you told me back then, but do cryptocurrencies really form the best type of money?
That's such a loaded question, Nick, but I do like it. Look, I do believe that they are the best money. They may not be actually the best money, but I believe they will be the money that we use in the future. And look, and we've spoken about this for a long time, over many years, and I'm sure there's plenty of people that disagree with me, but I believe that in the future that we will be using a cryptocurrency as a global reserve currency, and most likely that's going to be Bitcoin. That doesn't mean that Bitcoin is necessarily the money that we will all use, much in the same way as we don't use US dollars here in the UK and you do not use US dollars in Japan. So in that sense, I think that we will be using a crypto-based financial system and monetary system that will be deeply rooted in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
What makes cryptocurrencies superior to some of the things we've discussed in the other videos, like gold and silver and variations of precious metals?
Look, there's actually probably some commonality between cryptocurrency and gold and some of the commodities in that sense, in that, you know, when you go back to the origins of what cryptocurrency is and why it really came about, well, sort of starting with Bitcoin, most predominantly, is very much a story about power control of finance, of a monetary system. And as we know, the traditional financial system is very deeply etched with centralized control. The central bank governs the monetary policy and obviously the government with fiscal policy, and how those two intertwine into how global economies work. You know, it's the stuff we've been using our whole lifetimes, and for people watching, their whole lifetimes. To a degree. I mean, there was obviously the gold standard, which you know much more about, and so forth. But I think what we're facing now is a point in time where there's a realization that that system may not actually be one that works. I mean, we've known that for a while, that it doesn't really work, and that it has the potential to work, but those that are in power and have that centralized authority are kind of stuffed it up quite badly. And that brings us to a point now, which has been really building for arguably a couple of decades. You just can't continue to keep the traditional financial system, monetary systems going the way they are, because already, you know, there are a number of sovereign nations that are effectively bankrupt. So what cryptocurrency does is it takes that centralized authority out of the question, and we are talking about, with something like Bitcoin, a decentralized, distributed, permissionless network, where the monetary system of Bitcoin is etched into code, into immutable code. Now, it can be improved and upgraded, but effectively the core sort of basics of that, of the number of issuance of Bitcoin that can ever exist, how that actually comes about through mining, and then the smaller denominations of that really do unlock what has the potential to be a fully fledged global reserve currency, with more than enough circulation that we could be talking about entire circular economies that use Bitcoin as the currency that underpins them.
We made a video with John Butler about central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. And the impression that I got from that video and from my own research, obviously, is that CBDCs are the next technological upgrade in that controlled, centralized financial system that you've been talking about. And that's all they are. They're the next level. They use cryptocurrency technology to some extent. Whereas the cryptocurrencies that you focus on, that is something radically different in its nature, right? So that people don't get confused, because the underlying technology is similar in some ways. Can you highlight that difference for me again between, a real shift of a Bitcoin or something similar being a reserve currency or an underlying monetary asset versus this CBDC system?
Yeah, I mean, a central bank digital currency isn't going to be grossly different to what everybody currently uses. In reality, most of the money that we actually have and use, fiat money, pounds, yen, dollars, whatever it is, it's mostly digital anyway. And for people that don't understand, is that the traditional system works on a fractional reserve policy. So there are not enough physical units of money in the world if everybody wanted to have their deposits from the bank and stick it under a mattress in the bed. So in that sense, a lot of the money that does circulate around the world today is already digital. It is backed and based by nothing. By trust in the government is effectively what the central banks and the government will have you believe, is that money as we have traditionally known it is fundamentally backed by the trust in the central bank and government. If you take that away, then you don't have trust in the money that we currently use. And that is a trend that is building more and more momentum. Nonetheless, it's centralized issuance control. The upgrade to central bank digital currencies just amplify that control. It makes it easier for them to disseminate money to parts of the economy and parts of society, and also shut it off. So it's a very controlled environment. People say that it's going to be, central bank crypto. It won't be, because it will fundamentally be built on private networks controlled by the Bank of England or the Bank of Japan or whoever it might be that's issuing it, and continue to be controlled by fiscal and monetary policy. Anyway, so that's sort of that to one side. When we're talking about cryptocurrency, there is no central bank of Bitcoin. There is no CEO of Bitcoin. There's no board of Bitcoin. The network itself, without trying to get too technical behind it, is decentralized in a way that nodes, miners, participants all over the world are the network, and that the code that determines how many Bitcoin are issued as a reward for miners that come into circulation has been etched in stone since the very first Bitcoin block and Bitcoin reward back in 2009. So it's never changed, and it won't change. So there will only ever be just under 21 million Bitcoin. And if you actually look at how you can divide Bitcoin into the smallest denomination of a Bitcoin, which is a quarter Satoshi, we're talking about a 2.1 quadrillion Satoshi issuance in total. Now, if the way it progresses is the way that I see it progressing, where we have Bitcoin as a global reserve currency with circular economies based on that, entire supply chains that buy things, sell things, trade in with Bitcoin underpinning that money system, then 2.1 quadrillion is more than enough to have a fully functioning system like that. It is by nature deflationary in that sense, is that you will only ever have a capped amount. There will be supply and demand that come with that if it continues to progress the way that I believe it will. But what it fundamentally does is it makes us think about the concepts that we've built our financial system on around, inflation and growth and capital, access to capital, and how we get access to capital and credit and debt in economies to fuel that growth. It makes us rethink all those concepts about actually, is that sustainable? And that perhaps this is an alternative system that actually works better for the whole of society rather than the wealth hoarders and centralized controllers. So in that sense, this is where you get a lot of the, tribal pushback, from whether it be from gold believers and investors, or whether it be traditional financial types, or pure crypto Bitcoin maxis, is that we don't really know how it is going to play out. Is that it's in theory how it could play out and how we think it might play out, But in reality, we just don't know. But what it does do is it provides us with a viable alternative that gives us that potential to take some of that control away from those who have basically stuffed things up for the last 15, 20 years.
And much further than that, I would suggest. I think your key point here is that, you know, there's a big difference between designing something and saying it's going to work, and then it sort of comes up short, and something evolving and improving over time. And Bitcoin's an evolving and improving idea, and the fiat system is controlled and determined and will fail over time. And so it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that, you know, if it becomes true, it's because cryptocurrencies were the best form of money. They were the best alternative there at the time. And while everybody else is debating about this very theoretically, cryptocurrencies are actually happening. But the story goes back much more than 2009 and the launch of Bitcoin. And I think people need to understand this, that there was a bit of a movement. There's an ideology behind all of this that gives away a lot about what Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are all about.
Yeah, I mean, so this is why every time people, sort of new to crypto and Bitcoin, what I do is I tend to tell them that before you really start to sink your teeth into this, go back and read the very original white paper from Satoshi Nakamoto, and then read the email threads. So the actual white paper was released in 2008. I think it was October 2008. And then between that and the actual launch of Bitcoin in January 2009, there's a whole bunch of email threads between Satoshi, Hal Finney, a couple of other sort of somewhat skeptics. And they moot the idea of Bitcoin based off the white paper. And they discuss some of the potential of it, what it could become. Hal Finney, sort of forecasts. He goes, if this catches on and it becomes, a significant part of global finance, then, he forecasts, I think $1 million Bitcoin, all the way back in 2008. But what you will also find is in that original white paper is that Satoshi references a number of other researchers and digital money ideologists that go back actually as far as I think the 70s or 80s, really. So this has actually been something that's been brewing since the world came off the gold standard. And through the 70s and 80s and 90s has been a continual, and early 2000s has been a continual sort of idea that originally kind of existed amongst cryptographers, the cypherpunk community, very much almost a very kind of anti-establishment type approach to money and how things can be issued. And it references things like Nick Szabo, it references I think David Chaum, and a whole bunch of other different researchers that have sort of theorized on the idea of how digital money could work. And there were actually cryptocurrencies before Bitcoin. They just never kind of got traction and got going in the same way that Bitcoin did. And I think that's primarily because when Bitcoin's first block actually was mined, the Genesis block, was out the back of the 2008 global financial crisis, and the market had basically hit a bottom around sort of March of 2009. So Bitcoin kind of came along as we got one of the earliest recognitions of how much our financial system had been distorted and convoluted and corrupted. And so the timing was right for Bitcoin. Whether by intention or by accident, could be a bit of both. But there were several starts before Bitcoin even really came about. And as I say, some of the names that you should look at, Adam Back, David Chaum, Wei Dai, Nick Szabo, they've done a lot of research on digital money. I think one of the ones is B Money. Again, it's Bitcoin wasn't something that just came about out of thin air. It had been building and building and building amongst these communities for some time. And it was very much that sort of anti-establishment approach to centralized authority and control of finance. And what could our world look like if we took that into a decentralized way? Then Bitcoin came along, and I guess I've referenced it before as like the big bang of digital money, really. Yeah, that there was this sort of clashing of atoms, and this is what we've been left with, this burgeoning, emerging, fascinating alternative financial system.
Yeah, that mention of it being anti-establishment and the legacy financial system, that's what interests Nigel Farage, and why he's partnered with you, a UK Independent Wealth, to try and make people realise, at Fortune and Freedom, our readers tend to be anti-establishment as well, and to help them realise that's what the connection is and why he's so interested in cryptocurrencies. There's a particular distinction, though, that we should be making here, as I understand it, which is between the Bitcoin maxis, as you've called them, and I don't know what the altcoiners are called.
I won't use the word, but I can tell you what Bitcoin maxis call them. Look, there's a lot of tribalism in the crypto communities. Some good, some bad. I think you've got to kind of understand that. Obviously the motives of certain people are very vested in what they're doing, and so a lot of the Bitcoin maximalists, I can understand where they're coming from, and look, to be fair, from all accounts, is that the way in which Bitcoin was constructed, the code behind it, the way that it works, it does, and even its original intentions, its original intentions of a peer-to-peer medium of exchange, it's sort of moved away to that. It's become a bit of a store of value, but there's a lot of other things happening in terms of development around Bitcoin's network that allow it to be money and a store of value, and a whole bunch of different kinds of things. So it's a very unique asset, and we shouldn't ever try and think of Bitcoin as gold or an asset like a stock or property, because Bitcoin is Bitcoin. So we need to get our head out of TradFi, traditional finance thinking, and realize that it is what it is. People don't go, if we never had a house and then all of a sudden the first house came along, people wouldn't go, oh, this house is like a stock. It must be like, it's like, no, it's a friggin' house. It's its own thing. And so you've got to think about Bitcoin in that sense. Again, it challenges us how we think about money and finance. Then you look at other cryptocurrencies, and probably the other prominent ones that people constantly reference when we're talking about money is Ethereum. Weirdly, XRP, which used to be called Ripple. These are the kinds of cryptocurrencies that again have very tribal communities behind them that are like, no, ours is the best. Ours is the best. It's like, oh, just chill your beans. They're very different beasts. They're Ethereum and XRP and a lot of other altcoins aren't as decentralized as you might think they are. They are working towards that, or at least Ethereum is. And there is the potential that Ethereum could be as usable as a currency as like we talked about before. The global financial system is made up of many different currencies that interact and exchange with each other. And if we're based on a crypto-based financial system, it'll be very much the same. Multiple cryptocurrencies that are readily and easily exchangeable and tradable. And have different valuations and values based on a whole bunch of different factors. But effectively, it's kind of like a testing ground for what global finance could be. And we're still very early in that testing phase. As much and all as Bitcoin has got immense traction and an incredible potential, we're still kind of figuring out what it can be and how it can be used. It certainly can be used. It can be used as a store of value if you continue to, relate it into fiat money like pounds or dollars or cents or whatever. Or if you are like me and you take a very long-term approach with your mindset to Bitcoin, I want me and my family and my boys and their boys and generations to come to have wealth in Bitcoin, because I don't give a stuff about pounds or dollars or cents. If it plays out the way I see, the way I think it will, with circular economies based around Bitcoin as an underpinning global reserve currency, then I don't care about fiat currency. I want to have wealth in Bitcoin. And all the other cryptocurrencies will exchange for Bitcoin if that's the global reserve, or if it's something else, then so be it. But that's kind of why I try and help people to try and understand you've got to take a longer term view about this, because if you're serious about an alternative financial system, then you can't be thinking back into pounds or dollars or yen or euros or whatever it might be. You've got to decouple your thinking from that. And if you're doing so, then when you stack sats, when you add to your Bitcoin holding or your other crypto, whatever it might be, you don't care about the price volatility that people keep coming back to. Bitcoin crashes by 50%. Yeah, if all you want to do is cash it back into pounds or dollars. If you don't intend to do that, then your Bitcoin holdings haven't changed at all. If anything, they've become more valuable because there's now less of them available in the market. So again, I keep coming back to this idea of making us rethink what money is, how a global financial system can operate, and what the global reserve currency of tomorrow could be.
Just in really simple terms, explain the importance of that circular economy idea, that the buying and the selling and everything takes place within Bitcoin. Why is that so important?
It's important because if somewhere along that supply chain you have somebody that is only ever interested in pounds or fiat money, then it kind of breaks down. And this is why this isn't a change that happens overnight, right? This is a change that is kind of generational and may not happen even while you and me are alive, to be honest. But I do see it that long term, that maybe it's 50 years, maybe it's 100 years, I don't know. Maybe it's 10. Shit, I don't know. Maybe it could be shorter. But the point is that I use an example of farm to table. If you've got I've got a steak bake literally on my desk here that I'm desperate to eat because I'm starving. So inside that is steak, right? That steak comes from a producer that gets it, the cattle from a farmer. That farmer grows the cattle, but he's got to pay for the feed and the facilities. And what I'm saying is that entire supply chain, if that payment of when the farmer goes to buy feed, he pays in Bitcoin. When the abattoir charges whatever, they're paid in Bitcoin. When the farmer sells it, he's paid in Bitcoin. When I buy my steak bake from the shop, I pay in Bitcoin. Then you've got an entire circular economy where the exchange and trade takes place fundamentally in Bitcoin. If whoever the farmer buys the feed from wants to get paid in pounds, that kind of all breaks down, because he needs to then convert it back. And so then, the volatility of Bitcoin actually becomes an issue. And this is where that break in mindset is important. And look, I might be wrong. We might never get to that standard. I believe we will for a number of faulty factors in the traditional system. And there are a number of, it's a progressive thing. There are already, there are suppliers of goods and services that want to be paid in Bitcoin. We're seeing sovereign nations decide that, okay, we can accept this as legal tender. As that adoption starts to continue, and as we continue to see a growth in adoption, if all of a sudden you do find that, everybody along a supply chain is happily trading in Bitcoin, then all of a sudden fiat money becomes irrelevant, and the central bank becomes irrelevant. This causes issues, as we all know, about power and control, which, we don't know how that's always going to play out. But this is a real potential for an alternative, fully functioning financial system. And we may end up with just, two lanes where you've got a whole bunch of people and suppliers that are willing to operate in a circular Bitcoin economy, and you may have a whole bunch that just don't want a bar of it at all. I don't know how that plays out. And this is quite big picture idea to think that we can completely not rebuild, but we've built out a new financial system. To shift everything over to that is a big task. Maybe it doesn't happen. Maybe just the central banks and the governments fail and they all go bankrupt and they're their own worst enemy and they all go to zero. And that then the alternative that we've got in crypto isn't an alternative anymore. It's actually the lifeboat that saves us from the sinking ship.
Yeah, I'll let you get to your steak, Sam, but not before you tell us about your latest crypto project, which, depending on when people are watching this, they might find a link to below.
Okay, so with all of this, is we've been talking a lot about what could be the best money. What is the best money? When it comes to the crypto ecosystem, it's not just about money. Bitcoin is an integral part of what money can be and how a financial system can operate. But what is happening outside of that in the wider crypto system with a lot of altcoins, as people like to call them, is that same sort of core idea about a shift of power away from centralized controlling authority, and distributing and decentralizing that to amongst users, people, individuals like you and me and the people watching at home. That isn't just about money and finance. It can be about data, about privacy, about how we access content, how we create and share content, everything from music to collectibles to movies, to how we share information, or people like books or whatever it might be, social media, even how we track and trace. I used the example before of cattle, into a steak bake. But, I could possibly be able to track that steak. And if I'm, very conscious about it going through the right kinds of sustainability, farming and all that sort of stuff, I'll be able to find that out. So it's far more in this ecosystem than just Bitcoin and money. It's an entire explosion of different networks, ideas about how we can connect, create, access capital, build capital, raise capital, distribute capital. We're looking at whole change to capital markets, as well as I said, everything that's been very centralized and controlled and hoarded by, the titans of tech and government and I guess the global wealthy elites. It's shifting, it's changing, it's decoupling, and we're at a point with society and with the world where that's a very powerful idea. And there are a number of crypto, there are three in particular, that I think are going to be the bedrock of some of these core ideas around privacy, around data, around how we connect and interact and entertain with each other. So I think they have the potential to become, the great valuable titans of industry, but in a way where everybody gets to share in the benefits from it.
It seems to me that the underlying idea of all this is the idea of verification. So you've got, on the one hand, how do I know I own something? It's because the government says I do, which is a control-based system. And then there's the verification idea, which is what's built into the cryptocurrency world with blockchain and so on and so forth. And you've got those two options. You can have a system that is rules-based, and you can verify who owns what. You can deny someone access to something, and it's all about being able to verify who owns what and who controls what, versus reliance on an imposition of control from a central authority. And I think all of the readers and viewers of Fortune and Freedom will understand at least what that distinction is and why the need to decentralize and have verification based on something other than government control is going to be incredibly important over the next few years. And that, I think, gives cryptocurrencies at least an advantage over other forms of money. Sam Volkering, thanks very much for joining us. And to everyone at home, thanks for watching.